probably 250, 300 pounds, shaved head. He's talking about how, he's changed his life. He's now connected with his family. He's not using drugs anymore. And I see this guy. He's not one of my defendants, so I sat down next to Mark against the wall. And then I think Jimenez asked him the question, well, what do you hear about Judge Alm? And he goes, I hear he's a real prick. Well, everybody in the room kept a poker face. And Jimenez said, oh, he's really tough. He goes, oh, yeah, it's just terrible. A couple of minutes later, they finish. They thank him for being there. And he says, and then some bright light says, oh, why don't you meet Judge Alm? The guy's, oh, I'm sorry. But I told him, hey, you're being honest? That's fine. The numbers, as I've described, from the pretest, the 3 months before they start in Hope, to now 5 years later, have held pretty steady as far as a reduction in positive drug tests of 86%, missed appointments down to 80. But in order for folks really to want to look and evaluate a program, you got to have a random control trial. So in October of 2007, with funding from NIJ and the Smith-Richardson Foundation, Angela Hawken came out with a team. We got main branch probation because we thought, it's got to be in main probation where they have 170, 180 clients each, the worst possible thing, and have them do the random control trial study there. They identified 500 folks that were having problems with drugs, either not going to treatment. They were the future people to get transferred to this high-risk group. She ran the numbers through a computer program, which was an NIJ requirement. 2 out of every 3 names went into Hope. The other third were in a control group. And that has been ongoing ever since then. The preliminary numbers from that I find the most exciting. Revocations of probation appear to be down more than 50%, but the most significant is arrests for new crimes are more than 50% reduced for the study group compared to the control group. And I called the chief of police and I said, thank you for your efforts. This is what it looks like when this comes out. This is what it looks like. And that really solidified for him why it's worth it to spend these efforts in arresting them beforehand. And because I think more people go to prison when they're on probation for one offense and they pick up a new felony. And the repeat offender under the statute, they have to go to prison. Now, this is really the courtroom as a family or a classroom, but more of a family. The offenders are given clear expectations. They then are told what will happen, laid out what the consequences are, and then we actually follow through with it. And it's truly a teachable moment. I think it's akin to the work Larry Gentilello has been doing with the brief interventions at emergency rooms, with an emergency room doctor or a nurse when somebody's rolled their car from being drunk and they're getting pins in their leg, and they have a discussion about, you've been drinking, that kind of stuff. That is a teachable moment. Well, being in court, somebody's in a cell block, they're facing you, that's a teachable moment. And the only time I see the offenders is when they violated. And that's one of the significant differences with drug court, and I think what allows us to go to the size numbers we've been going to. We started with 34 offenders in June of 2004. We're now at 1,500, including 1,300 felons out of the 8,000 plus felons we have on Oahu. And they're the highest risk folks. Every sex offender on Oahu who's on probation is now in Hope. Many of the most profound drug problem folks, same way. We've made some very interesting discoveries and observations about this. The first of which is not everybody who uses drugs needs to go to treatment to stop using drugs. And many of whether it's the LSIR or the other assessment tools, require self-reporting. Well, you wouldn't bet the mortgage on asking these guys, do you use meth or how much you use meth? You're not going to get a straight answer much of the time. We are going to find out one way or the other with Hope, because they have to call the hotline every weekday morning. Their color's going to come up at least once a week, sometimes 2 days in a row to start with. If they show up successfully for 2 months, as a reward for compliance, they're given a new color, they come half as often. 2 more months, half as often again. They're down to once a month. We got to give some rewards in doing this, and decreased supervision is part of it. We also, find that folks told us that some of these guys have done time before. Giving them a few days in jail. And that's normally what the first violation is. It's a few days in jail. It may be a few days the next time. It may be a week. It all depends. If they ran away and absconded for a while, it's going to be longer than that. But critics told us, if guys have done time before, they're not scared of doing time. And what we have found out and what human nature teaches us is guys can do time when they have to, but they don't want to do it today. You know, and it's the disruptive nature of it. So they're thinking, if I use today, I might go to jail tomorrow. I don't want to go to jail tomorrow, so I'm not going to use today. And a number of folks are able to make that kind of choice. In the article that's handed out, the reporter did a great job of talking, and one of the offenders said something like, you know, here I'm on probation, I'm thinking about the hotline, I'm thinking about getting tested, it just ruined my high. You know, sweeter words were never spoken. And he said, it got to be too much, I just stopped using, you know. And these are guys who've been using meth for years. We have a bunch of folks that may have been in treatment in the past 10 years ago, but are still having problems. Well, maybe it's what they learned from the treatment, but having the swift and certain consequences gives them the structure. Maybe they go to AANA meetings, but they find a way through it. And this thing about not everybody getting treatment, let me see by a show of hands, how many of you know somebody or yourself used to be a cigarette smoker and managed to quit? Okay? How many folks that quit went to treatment? You know, I'm not against treatment, but not everybody needs it. And that's why the treatment providers in Hawaii really like Hope Probation, because we are not sending people there that don't need to be there. What that means, and Dr. Hawken coined the term behavioral triage. We are going to find out who really needs the treatment and who can stop on their own. And then when they go, they're going to get a higher level of treatment because it's either intensive outpatient or residential. And then they can really get the help they need. And if they're in residential, they're off the hotline, they're not seeing the PO. As soon as they transition to intensive outpatient, which is 3 times a week for a couple hours at a time, they're back on the hotline because they're out living in a clean and sober house. And we're there to provide that structure and help them that way. And even the offenders generally find this is a fair program. When Angela and Mark and the other folks went to interview people, I think in April they interviewed something like 200 of the folks in the project. Even the guys in jail were generally, you know, saying, well, it's fair, I was told, because the consequence is proportionate. You know, it's a week, it's 2 weeks. Of course, they ran into a couple of people. You got 2 weeks, I got a month, what's up, you know? And the guy with a month, you know, it may have been like his 3rd time or something, but they're not necessarily going to be totally honest with each other on that. There's no operator effect. When this expanded to all 10 courtrooms, every judge got the same results. And as hard as it may be for you to believe, not all of my colleagues are quite as enthusiastic about doing this as I was. But they got the same results. You've got to start small, and of course, if it works, then you can expand, and that's what we've been doing. The drug testers come in at 6:30 in the morning, so anybody who has to go to a paycheck job can get drug tested first and then go. We're trying to remove every hurdle/excuse for being successful. If they've got a paycheck job and they test positive, they're taken into custody. We will have a hearing like 2 hours later. We'll get attorneys on both sides. The person will come in. They'll stipulate to the violation, and then I'll tell them, you be at the jail 6 o'clock on Friday night, and give them a couple weekends. One of the reasons this works is I think I've had 4 or 5 contested hearings in the last 5 years. Otherwise, it would die of its own weight. The reasons, I think, are, one, we're not talking about what happened a year ago. We're talking about what happened 3 days ago or last week. And it's also proportionate. They know I'm not going to give them 5 years. If it ever gets to the point where probation's going to get revoked, I'll tell the attorneys we may continue it if they want to, gear up for stuff. They still, admit to it because there's really not much to fight. It's pretty cut and dried that way. Through Dr. DuPont's good work, I got hooked up with a plastic surgeon on Maui who is a real character. He asked me to come over to Maui to check out. I flew over there. I said, I can't come this Sunday, but I'll come the next Sunday. He picks me up at the airport in his Range Rover. We're pulling away. We shake hands, and he looks at me, and he goes, how old do you think I am? 67, pretty good, huh? He was a character. He volunteered to set up a Friends of the Maui Drug Court. Small program, but helping out. After that day on Maui, I came back and I said, we got to set up, you got to set up. As a judge, I have to have an arm's length relationship with all of these things, and I do. But they set up a Friends of Hope Probation. They're going to provide child care. They just got the IRS letter back. They're going to provide child care for anyone in Hope who needs to go to job training or a job interview and doesn't have family to watch their kids. They're going to pay to fix up their teeth. They're going to do services that the judiciary in good economic times could never do. And now they're going to provide that. So I'm tremendously hopeful about that. And the most recent thing is I have, in seeing how this all works, again, when you've got an idea that works, you've got to expand it. So we went to the Governor's Committee on Crime with a Byrne JAG grant. They got some extra money for with stimulus money. We asked for 2 more drug testers, 2 more probation officers, a deputy prosecutor position, a deputy public defender position. We got the grant, so my cases are now being distributed to the other judges. I kept about 7 jury trials to keep my sanity, but I'm going to supervise virtually all of the other Hope cases, and we're going to add another 1,500, 2,000 felons into the program, and I'll supervise all of them. Because right now we've shown you can do this on a part-time basis in addition to a regular felony trial calendar. I'm in the 3rd week, well, not this week, but we're 3 weeks into a major murder case, but I'm also supervising 950 folks on Hope. And the reason is they don't violate that often. We typically have about 35 hearings a week. Mark and Angela's results show something like the average hearing is 7 minutes long. So you can do this for the first hour in the day, and then the jury comes in at 9:30. So it can be done both ways. Once it becomes more of a dedicated situation, we're going to have a lot more that way. Hope started with $0 extra dollars. And there's been, for folks to start it, you've got to start small, but you don't need money to get this going. And that's a critically important part of it. You do have to get people to work harder and work faster. We've got due process there. We've got attorneys on both sides. They still play their traditional roles, but they've agreed to work faster and come into court sooner on it. Change is hard. I got folks together at the beginning. They have to be willing to work that way. What we were doing was not working. This is all about collaboration. And it was that way before. It's that way now. I've talked about NIJ and how they've collaborated. They are now paying underwriting for me to go to other states to talk about Hope. They are also underwriting teams from other states to come to Hawaii to learn about Hope. So in 3 weeks, we're going to have a team from Nevada and a team from Oregon. So a probation supervisor can come and talk to our probation supervisors. They can see how the court hearings go. We can talk. They can talk to whoever they want, or the warden can go talk to the jail and see how all that goes. Pew has been tremendously supportive. They hosted a one-day conference last summer to allow a lot of folks to come and hear about Hope and talk about it. And like I say, the Bureau of Justice Assistance with Lori Robinson and Marlene have been great about now funding these trips for people to come. Bob DuPont giving with a McGovern Award to Hope and supporting it that way. He also suggested, because we've been concerned from the beginning about another jurisdiction trying to do this on the cheap, picking a few elements of it, but not really doing it. And so he suggested, why don't you come up with some benchmarks? And so there's a handout of that. We've got that on the website. And if folks are seriously thinking about doing that, anybody in the business who reads that will realize this is not easy. This is going to take collaboration. But don't do a program and call it Hope or something like it unless you're doing all these things. Because you could easily see somebody doing a partial job of this, crashing and burning and saying this stuff doesn't work. But I think, that was a great suggestion. Congressman Schiff was instrumental in introducing legislation before. There's a small amount of money that came out of that. I think there's going to be a pilot set up in perhaps parole at some point. He's also looking at new legislation to do that, to have project sites around the country. Secretary of State Clinton was absolutely correct, as I think everybody in this room knows. The violence in Mexico, the thousands of people being killed, this would not be existing if we didn't have this insatiable demand for drugs in the United States. That is what's fueling this. Hope is drug demand reduction at its best. We can reduce this by 86% for the folks in it, and we will keep doing it. You do need to have a champion in each jurisdiction. I think it probably has to be a judge who's willing to drive this thing, to encourage people, to push people, and once in a while, in Mr. Costa's words, perhaps to be a prick about it. But people are not going to want to do more work and want to do things if they don't think it's going to work or if it's not in their best interest. So having the random control trial results coming out this fall should go a long way. I think we'll try to work with the Chief Justices to try to get it. By collaborating and working smarter and harder, we can change the way community supervision is done in this country. That means pretrial, that means probation, and that means parole. The whole thing, I think, can be changed and follow along with programs like HOPE. So all of it takes, I think, is a little bit of hope-mongering. So thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it. I'll be happy to answer any questions folks have.